If there are any rules that needed clarifying in the new player's handbook, hiding was on my list. The new rules attempt to do so, but I'm not so sure that they succeed. My name is Timothy, though some people do call me Tim. If you're new to the channel, welcome. Take a moment to like and subscribe just in case the buttons pass their DC 15 to go invisible, just like your characters will be able to using the new stealth rules. We'll dive right into it by starting with what we know. Here are the new stealth rules. With the hide action, you try to conceal yourself. To do so, you must succeed on a DC 15 dexterity stealth check while you're heavily obscured or behind 3/4 cover or total cover, and you must be out of any enemy's line of sight. If you can see a creature, you can discern whether it can see you. On a successful check, you have the invisible condition. Make note of the check's total, which is the DC for a creature to find you with a wisdom perception check. The condition ends on you immediately after any of the following occurs. You make a sound louder than a whisper, an enemy finds you, you make an attack roll, or you cast a spell with a verbal component. And here's the text for being invisible, which probably would have been called the hidden condition if it wasn't for backwards compatibility concerns. While you have the invisible condition, you experience the following effects. If you're invisible when you roll initiative, you have advantage on the roll. You aren't affected by any effect that requires its target to be seen unless the effect's creator can somehow see you. Any equipment you are wearing or carrying is also concealed. Attack rolls against you have disadvantage. Your attack rolls have advantage. If a creature can somehow see you, you don't gain this benefit against that creature. So there's some good and some bad and some ugly in all of this that are all worth touching on. First, let's start with the good. We're no longer stuck with DM Fiat and Mother May I play when it comes to whether or not it's possible to hide and or what breaks your invisibility, aka hidden status. And that's because now we have a straight up list. And that's a big improvement, because it was a little funky to see things change from table to table with seemingly no correlation, all based on what the DM thought was reasonable. Also in the good category, invisibility now has an added perk of providing a boost to your initiative, regardless of whether or not you are a part of a successful sneaking party. The person who is successfully hidden or who is invisible via magic is going to get a boost on their initiative roll by being able to roll with advantage. I feel like the self-contained nature of the invisible condition is also a huge perk, as previously the invisible condition referenced heavily obscured, which then referenced blinded, and involved a lot of switching through pages in order to get the entirety of its effects. And thanks to the wording changes and exactly how they were put together, we no longer have a loophole where see invisibility technically means that you can see where somebody is, but you still suffer the penalties of the attack roll. Not that people played it that way, but the loophole has been closed and the rules as written now matches the rules as intended. And a last good thing about these stealth rules that is sort of iffy as both good and bad is that now you specifically are mentioned as knowing if you can see somebody whether or not they see you. This means that you can now ask the question of do they see me, and the DM has guidance on how to give the answer. The answer is either yes or no, depending on whether they can. But it doesn't leave any room for somebody to actively attempt to deceive you and pretend not to see you, a skill which my cats have expertise in. Then there's the bad, the places where maybe the rules weren't written terribly well, or where it's just hard to figure out exactly why they were written that way. The first being the inclusion of 3/4 cover as an acceptable option for hiding. This makes a bunch of sense to me, but then we include in there the text that you must be out of line of sight of any enemy, and that completely contradicts it, because cover is always measured from somebody else's location and viewpoint. It doesn't actually make sense to include this on the list. Either you have to be out of line of sight of all of your enemies, or you have to have 3/4 cover, but you can't have both be possibilities for hiding when you state them definitively like that. If there's another option that I'm missing that makes this make sense, then I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Thanks. Another one that hits the bad note is that though you either have have to be heavily obscured or have total cover in order to start hiding, there's no mention of what you need in order to maintain your stealth. Which would mean by raw that as long as you start around a corner, you can hide from the city guard and then walk openly in broad daylight down the middle of the street and through the two guards that are standing watch at the gate, and the only way they'll notice you coming is if they are making a perception check and beat your score. Previously, in order to maintain stealth, you essentially needed to maintain some kind of light obscurement or cover, and that was a very needed piece of text in the wording that seems to be missing now. The last item on my bad list, which might not necessarily be bad, but seems to be very unintended, is that sea invisibility now appears to automatically spot anybody who is ever trying to hide, no matter how well they do so. Because it overcomes the invisible condition, and now that's what we're using for stealth, it automatically allows you to spot them. This is a huge buff for sea invisibility, but was it intended? I don't know, but it certainly skyrockets sea invisibility into the top tiers of best second level spells. Also, regarding sea invisibility, is that all other senses have been buffed likewise. Blindsight and Truesight, which have traditionally bypassed invisibility since they don't rely upon the visual senses, should and could now automatically detect invisible creatures, making dragons even harder to sneak up on. In the ugly category includes the need for a DC 15 check in order to successfully hide, no matter the perceptive skills of your opponents. This one feels reasonably sensible in a narrative sense in some ways, and then honestly, if you're not successfully hiding, you're not successfully hiding, but that's what perception skills are for, is to determine whether or not somebody is so oblivious that the lumbering hulk that jumps between two crates is able to do so without getting spotted. A DC 15 is a pretty high bar for characters like the Paladin and their heavy plate mail that traditionally have suffered from a lack of stealth skill in the first place. But as far as I can tell, Pass Without a Trace is still unchanged with its plus 10 bonus, meaning a DC 5 to go invisible is still very attainable for every member of the party. Good or bad? Let me know your thoughts in the comments about needing a DC 15 to hide. And hey, while you're there, like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, a little bit ugly is that the old rules specify that a passive perception defeated a hide check. But the player's handbook, according to Treant Monk, since I haven't got my copy just yet, tell us that we don't have any specific rules for passive perceptions except how to calculate them. When the new rules come out, we might discover if hiding is something that is defeated by passive scores, but for the time being, we're left not really knowing. And if we're strictly using the 2024 rules that are coming out in September, then hiding is probably opposed only by active checks, which means that for the time being, we're pretty much using DM fiat as to whether or not passive skills are going to apply. Me personally, I will stick with the use of passive skills against stealth until the DMG comes out and hopefully clarifies the issue. What do you think of the new rules? And are there any other rules that you want to deep dive into? Let me know, and thanks again for watching. Happy adventuring.